The Temple Road of Shalom Gun Violence Prevention Team's panel discussion on 5 strategies for preventing gun violence. Welcome to those here and welcome to those streaming. We are going to talk about the 5 strategies developed by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health Center for Gun Violence Solutions. And we're going to see what we can do to help get these strategies implemented. We are pleased to have TRS member Josh Horowitz, by the way, spelled with an O, not a U, as some of our announcements had it spelled wrong, but sorry, act as a moderator. Josh is the Dana Feitler Distinguished Professor of the Practice in Gun Violence Prevention and Advocacy at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and he is the co-director of the Center for Gun Violence Solutions. At the school, he teaches classes on the topic of public health advocacy. Professor Horowitz works to reduce gun violence by utilizing public health research and analysis to build advocacy campaigns that meet critical opportunities in the policy development process. Another one of our panelists is Lori Haas. Hi, Lori. Lori is the advocacy manager at that center, the Center for Gun Violence Solutions. After her daughter, Emily, was shot twice and survived the 2007 Virginia Tech massacre, Lori became a very strong voice in the gun violence prevention movement and a leader in Virginia advocating for policy and programs to address the public health epidemic of gun violence. Another panelist that we have is Delegate Marcus Simon, also a TRS member. Marcus Simon has served in the Virginia House of Delegates since 2014. He represents the 13th district, which includes Falls Church and parts of Fairfax County. As chair of the House Public Safety Committee and vice chair of the Courts of Justice Committee, he has been a leading voice in advancing comprehensive gun violence prevention policies. Delegate Simon has championed legislation targeting untraceable ghost guns, which sought to prohibit the manufacture, sale, and possession of unserialized firearms, like firearms without serial numbers, and unfinished frames or receivers. Although these bills did not become law, his advocacy has been instrumental in raising awareness and pushing for stricter regulations on ghost guns. In addition to his leadership roles, Delegate Simon serves on the General Laws and Rules Committee, where he continues to advocate for public safety and justice reform. And finally, Paul Friedman. He's the executive director of the Safer Country organization. It's a gun violence prevention nonprofit focused on keeping guns out of unsafe hands. He founded Safer Country in 2019 after serving for 2 years as executive director for the nonprofit created by the families and survivors of that Virginia Tech tragedy. Days after having had lunch with his aunt, he lost his great aunt. He lost her to a bullet during an invasion of her motel room while on vacation in Miami, Florida. Paul graduated with a BA in politics from Brandeis and a JD from New York Law School. I should add that all of the people involved here, well, except me and Lori, are lawyers. Okay.
Not me.
To mention that.
Not Lori.
And now for a bit of logistics. We planned to have audience question cards filled out, and then we would look at them and then give them to Josh. And we're going to collect the question cards like 20 minutes prior, around 4 o'clock, okay? It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Rabbi Sachs for an invocation and then to Josh to moderate. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna, and thank you to all of the leaders who have put together this really important event. It's so easy to develop fatigue when working on this issue, and it's easy to look at all there is to be done and throw up your hands. And it's easy to look at all of the violence that happens, all the deaths that happen through gun violence, and give up and do nothing. And I think that is one reason. The Talmud teaches us that that is the reason that when we learn about creation in the book of Genesis, that we learn that humanity was created in one person, in Adam. That the Talmud says, and you've heard some of this teaching, the Talmud says that the reason that we learn that humanity began just with one person is so that we can see that destroying one person is akin to destroying the world. And in the same way, the saying that many of us repeat over and over again, that saving one life is as if we have saved the world. And it's only through looking at the world and each life through this lens that we can keep the motivation to keep going and to remember that other Jewish teaching that you shall not remain indifferent. Lo tuchal lehitalem. You cannot shrink away. You cannot disappear. You cannot just sit idly by, and watch as more and more people are injured and die. So thank you to the leaders who planned this event, and thank you to all of our panelists. And a huge thank you always to Josh Horowitz, who is our resident expert and advocate at Temple Road of Shalom on this issue. Thanks, Josh.
The microphone, I think it's not quite loud enough for that.
Yeah. Sure, how's that? Okay, great. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Edna, for organizing this. It's always such a pleasure to be here home at Road of Shalom. I get to speak a lot all over the country. It's never better than when I get to be here at our congregation. And thanks to just everybody for having us today. This is an important issue, and thanks to this amazing panel we have as well. This is an amazing panel. It's a very challenging issue, as Jeff mentioned, but it's also one that we're starting to see a fair amount of success. And we want to keep that going, even despite these challenging times. So I guess I start the world as an optimist, so that's helpful. But I also realize that over 35 years in this issue, we have made some progress, some great strides some places, and we have a lot of work to do in other places. And I'm going to talk to you about that, and I'm going to talk to you about the approach for about 10 minutes that we have at our center, the Center for Gun Violence Solutions, which I'm very proud to be co-director. Lori works there as well. And it's a very unique place. So when you go, I worked as an advocate for many years. You know, I go and lobby in the Virginia legislature and in Congress, and we'd write reports and things like that, always with a public health lens. But I had an opportunity to join Johns Hopkins as a professor of the practice in 2022. And it was really a brand new thing we attempted to create, which is an academic center that gets involved directly in advocacy. 3 years later, I'm happy to report that we've been able to do that. Obviously, we live in very challenging times right now, but we're able to do that. So what do we do at the center? Number one, we recognize gun violence as a public health epidemic and a public health emergency. So that means that we need to lean in at all times because the public health burden is very high, and I'll get into that in a second. The other thing is all of our solutions are evidence-based, much of it on our own research. So we don't find a topic that might do well in direct mail or might sound good on TV. We find the topics that are policy relevant through our own research, and we develop and work on policy where we know that particular solutions will work and save lives, and I'll describe how that works in a minute. The other thing that we have, which is, I think, quite unique, is in addition to our absolutely world-class, top-of-the-line researchers, we match that with an incredible group of advocates. Lori is one of them. She's our policy manager and works in Virginia and other states and does it better than anybody else. We also have a team of media experts, legal experts. We have people who just focus on media and research translation. So we've built something very unique, and I think that our model, the mixing of academia, and the advocacy is unique and very successful, and with a lot of promise. And our slogan is research drives solutions to save lives. We marry our solutions and our research together. So I just want to talk a little bit about the burden. So this is the amount of people who died in 2022 across the country. The 2023 numbers are just out, and I can tell you that, so in 2022, we had almost 20,000 people die by homicide. The numbers there are starting to improve. So we're seeing less people die by gun homicide the last 2 years. Suicide, 27,000 people die by gun suicide. Those numbers are not improving. In fact, every year have been going up by a few percentage points. So right now we have, in 2024, well, 2023, which I have the most accurate records, we have the highest gun suicide deaths ever recorded, okay, ever recorded. So we're making progress on the homicide side, not enough. And one thing to realize is that all these little dots up there and all those people, they represent real people who die. And I think we've all known people these days who've been shot. We all share that, I think, in society. But when I talk about those numbers, there's real people with real families who suffer every day because of these losses. There's some small amount of other firearm deaths as well. Unintentional is a small amount, legal intervention, and then there's some that are undetermined. But the big categories are firearm homicide and suicide. On the left, you'll see, on your left, you'll see the report cover for a report. We're about to get the 2023 numbers out. And the far right is a QR code. You can download the report yourself. So I don't have to get it for you. What about Virginia? What do we know about Virginia? Virginia is a state that has made some real progress in policy and investments. I think it shows. I'll show you in the middle. It's not the best, but it's certainly not the worst. In 2022, we had over 1,300 gun deaths in Virginia. And again, like the federal level, the majority of those, about 60%, are gun suicides. Okay, so we have a homicide problem, which we hear about a lot. But we also have a very substantial gun suicide problem that we don't talk about as much. And I'll just let it be known that I had a dear friend who died from gun suicide. That's one of the reasons that I'm involved here. And it doesn't hurt any less. And so these are real, these makes up, and all the things in common with this is a gun was at hand. A gun made it easy for someone to die by suicide or homicide. So in the last decade, gun death has risen 50% in Virginia. So we have a pretty substantial problem here. And I'm happy to share these slides. And of course, we're talking about solutions today, so I want to give you the scope of the problem. But I also want to be clear that we do have solutions, and we don't have to throw up our hands and be like, there's nothing we can do, because there's a lot. So I want to talk about those before we talk to this amazing panel about these solutions. So our goal, you got to have a goal, is we want to reduce gun violence 30% by 2030. That's our goal, and I think we can do it if we are diligent and work hard, not just us up here, but everybody, especially on the 5 things that I want to mention to you. So these are, in our work, there are lots of solutions, but when you said, you sort of tie our hands behind our back and say, what are the best things to do to stop gun violence? We try to give people those answers because there's 20, 30, 40 things you could do. But if you really had to focus on a couple of things, what are those? This is what we've done here. So number 1 is firearm purchaser licensing. So we have here concealed carry, so you need a license to carry a gun, but you don't need a license to purchase a gun. Only about 11 states have that right now. Virginia does not. Hopefully we'll be able to work on that in the future, but it is among the most important ways to save lives from homicide, suicide. It even reduces police-involved shootings. So it's a very important thing. And purchaser licensing includes an enhanced background check, a fingerprint, training, and you have to actually, and also putting your application in directly with law enforcement seems to be a pretty important step there as well. So there's pieces of that that make up a powerful licensing strategy, and when you have those, you can save lives. The other piece that we're going to talk a bunch about here is firearm removal laws, domestic firearm protection or domestic violence protection orders, and extreme risk protection orders. Here in Virginia known as risk orders, and those are orders where actually in Virginia, where law enforcement can go to court, ask a judge to remove temporarily a firearm from someone they believe is a danger to yourself or others. And we'll talk a lot about that, but there's some nice evidence around there. Basically saying, can we take the most lethal means away from people who are in crisis, just for a little while? And the evidence seems to be accumulating that makes a big difference. Third thing, for all firearm owners here, safely secure your firearms. Sounds like a no-brainer, but not that many people do it. And putting your gun in a safe when it's not on you is very, very important. It prevents your gun being stolen. It prevents youth from accessing your firearm. And it also gives just one more step if you are at risk of harm to yourself. One more step, one more little amount of time to think about, do I really need to access my firearm? And so safe storage, again, is an important piece. Not any one of these will get us all that 30%, but together they will. The other piece is, fourth thing, is what we call funding to strengthen community violence intervention programs, CVI. This is what you might have heard about last week when the Department of Justice cut funding all over the country. That's what was for these programs. And these are programs where people from the community who are credible messengers are mediating disputes and bringing people who may be out on the streets or otherwise with a firearm into services like housing, employment, job training, things like that. And it seems to be, there's some mixed results, but a lot of it can be very effective. And that funding has been shut off last week, and hopefully gets restored, but I don't know, and I think that will be a very big impact. The fifth piece of our 5 that save lives is regulating the public carry of firearms, and we're going to talk a little about this on the panel. In Virginia, we have a concealed carry license. You have to have certain requirements. You have to get a license. Over 25 states don't require a license anymore, and there are members of Congress who are trying to allow those people who live in those states carry in our state without getting a license. So, but guns in public, it's all about availability and accessibility. The more guns out there, the more disputes turn into firearm assaults, the more guns get stolen and trafficked. So regulating the public carry of firearms in a meaningful way is part of our 5 that save lives. Now, just really quickly about the evidence. We have a natural experiment. Connecticut enacted firearm purchaser licensing laws, and their firearm homicide rate decreased 28%, and the firearm suicide rate decreased 33%. Missouri had firearm purchaser licensing, and they got rid of it, and their homicide rate went up, and their firearm suicide rate went up as well. So we think this is, again, among one of the most powerful interventions, but we also have it based on our own research. That's what I like about our center. We do, there's laws, but we're doing the research, we understand the research, and we can really lean into it and feel comfortable that we're having the best types of solutions. Extreme risk protection orders, I mentioned those. We're starting to see some really nice results of, especially when it comes to firearm suicide. We're starting to see some unanimity, like studies. This is a very new thing. I mean, Virginia's had it how long, y'all? 5 years?
Yes.
5 years?
In July.
Yeah, 5 years in July. So it's hard to study something that's only been around for 5 years, but the arrows are starting to point the right direction, that there's a very important intervention, especially so far for suicide prevention. So excited about that. I just want to give you some of the data out there as well. Now, the geography of gun violence, I think, is important. If you look at these states where I have the arrow, all those states have all the 5 that save lives. And their firearm death rate is, about 3 or 4 per 100,000, okay? You look at states over here, by the way, this is Virginia. Should have changed my slide. Right at the national average, right at the national average. Then you look at states like Mississippi and Louisiana, and those states have 30 30 deaths per 100,000, firearm deaths per 100,000.
What are the states in the far right is Kansas?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Hawaii, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, California. All those have almost all the things I'm just describing. So very important. And, some of these states, you'll see some of these rural states like North Dakota have just a giant firearm suicide rate. The blue is the firearm suicide. So you think, oh, it's safe there. Well, it depends what you mean by safe, right? There's a lot of firearm death in those states. So these laws work. The data tells us this. And when you stratify states by rate of gun violence, it's the same.
Virginia.
Oh, yeah, Virginia's right here, right at the national average, which is not a great thing, right?
Between Texas and Michigan.
Yeah, this is one of those things that you want to be below the national average. Okay, other thing is these policies are very popular. Not only do we do our own research on policy and policy implementation, but also on favorability. So these policies that we just described are all in very safe plus territory, very popular among constituencies you would think, like Democrats and people who don't own guns, but also among Republicans and gun owners. These are the types of things that are extremely popular. And if you can talk about the policies rather than like gun control writ large or things like that and say, hey, we want a license before you can buy a gun, you get really strong support across the board for these types of things. So I think that's important to, when sometimes you see polls that say, oh, we ask the question, do you support gun control or gun, whatever, and, you get about 50%. If you ask a question, do you support extreme risk laws, you're in the 80s. So that's something that's important to understand. When you be specific, people respond to those. So I just wanted to frame this discussion with just a little bit of epidemiology to start with and the 5 that save lives. And actually, this was Edna's idea to talk about it, and I'm glad you did because at our center, I'm like, yeah, we have 5 that save lives. So perfect. Oh, whose idea? Okay, the group's idea. You're modest. It was the group's idea. You can visit our website to learn more about these and see all the evidence behind it. Center for Gun Violence Solutions. So it is a great resource. The website. You've got the QR code for the report. So let's get into our panel discussion. And please feel free to write your questions down and we can get them. And I'm going to direct a few to Delegate Simon because he has to go back to work this afternoon and go drive down to Richmond, I understand. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. So
I'll hog the mic early. But
yeah, we'll do that early.
You can time later.
Yeah, so let's just start, since we have some real experts on this, with, we showed some national data, we also showed some Virginia data, but we live here in Virginia. And it's important. I spend a fair amount of time at the legislature. Lori spends every day at the legislature, and of course Delegate Simon does as well. Paul, I think you're down there occasionally as well.
Occasionally.
So let's just talk about sort of 2025. What do we see in 2025? I think there was some real progress and then a roadblock. So how does that all work in 2025?
So, great question, and thanks for this information. So 2025 started out great, right? I mean, it was amazing. We had all kinds of good, positive gun violence prevention bills that we introduced. They flew through subcommittee and committee, and I just had to remind all of our very new members. We have about 40 new members of the General Assembly out of 140 that were just sworn in 2 years ago. And they got very excited. I'm like, guys, none of this is going to happen, right? You guys understand that the governor's about to veto all of this good legislation. So, of the 5 things, I mean, we had issues. We wanted to enhance our existing red flag law. We had bills that tried to remove some loopholes that you people were using to get around so in other words, about to have somebody, take out an extreme risk protection order. So I'll get rid of my firearms by giving them to my brother-in-law who lives with me, right? I've just transferred custody of the firearms and things like that. So we're trying to fix some of those problems. And again, they all made sense on an individual basis and passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in a number of cases. A lot of the stuff comes out to 5149, but occasionally some of the stuff comes out because it's popular, even better than that, but nothing that's going to get us past a veto-proof majority. So, but what we did though is sort of, and frankly, the goal was to lay out the contrast for the upcoming election, right? And what's at stake here, right? So we saw what, with a Democratic-controlled legislature, with a governor who would sign some of these bills, some of the things that we could achieve in Virginia. So whether it's, again, closing some of the loopholes that have weakened our red flag law so it doesn't work as well, whether it's safe storage and doing really the gold standard in safe storage, which is to say you've got to store your firearms in a locked container and the ammunition in a different container, and that if you do it together, it's got to be with a certain biometric safe. All those sorts of things we did pass through the legislature. So safe storage has been an issue I've worked on it the last 2 years. Senator Boysko and I carried the bill on safe storage. Talked a little bit earlier before you guys got here about storage of firearms in vehicles and how we've tried to improve that. Reporting lost and stolen firearms, enhance the requirement that if you're, one, prevent your firearm from being stolen from your car, and two, if it is, please let law enforcement know so that we can start to work on that. I mean, the list sort of goes on. We do have well, I know I won't go through all of it. Anyway, the basic answer is a lot of progress legislatively. We got a lot of legislation in really good shape by running it through the subcommittee and committee process and getting it vetted and getting it in the form that we would like. And then we tried, and not always successfully, we tried to convince some of the members also not to water anything down, right? So occasionally you get some legislators that say, well, listen, I really like this idea, and I think something's better than nothing, and maybe the governor will sign it if we do this to it, right? Or maybe if I just try and tackle this really small piece of it, maybe we can get the governor to sign it. And generally you can't, but now you've lowered the bar for what people have voted on. And then sometimes he will, and you get a bill that hasn't really done anything, and it kind of hurts that larger effort, right, which is to draw that contrast between what's possible and what's not. So a few things did pass. I mean, if you hear Republicans saying, well, we passed 6 or 7 pieces of gun violence legislation, little things like reporting a suicide risk, having schools being required to report a suicide risk to parents at school and say, hey, if you've got a gun in the house, you probably want to rethink that because your child has expressed to our counselor some ideation of self-harm and so forth. So little things like that, which actually fit more in, as far as they're concerned, fit more in that parents' rights box than a gun violence prevention box. Got a signature, so they sometimes they come to the right answer for the wrong reasons on some of these things, which you'll take it. But again, strategically, you guys don't do the politics and the mailers. That's my job. So for our mailers, it's not always helpful to have. But so I wouldn't even call it a mixed bag. I would say that it was pretty much a failure across the board, not from a lack of effort or lack of skill, just the governor was not interested in doing anything meaningful on gun violence prevention. We even took a step backward. Last year, and another bill I wasn't thrilled about, we had something called I've heard of auto sears, these Glock switches, right? So they're these devices that you can manufacture at home with a 3D printer that will turn a semi-automatic handgun and allow it to rapidly fire to the point that it operates like a machine gun. And we had a bill to ban those. And this is always, whenever the Virginia, what are they called? Virginia Citizens Defense League doesn't oppose the bill. It's like, maybe we should be suspicious. And it turned out, the way it was written, it really didn't do much, right? So we had a redrafted version of the bill that would have actually accomplished what we were trying to accomplish in a much better way. That was vetoed this year. So
it's interesting because Alabama actually passed a
Glock switch.
Glock switch bill, and we couldn't do it in Virginia. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, worse than Alabama. Again, I'm looking at the chart again. So, but again, I know you ask what's coming up in the future, but maybe Lori, I don't know if Lori has a much different take. Usually, she and I are very much in lockstep. There's very rarely much room between us. But my view is, again, although the Republicans will cite a couple of things that they didn't veto, they were Democratic bills to begin with. But I would say some good foundational work as far as laying the groundwork for what's possible, but ultimately nothing good happened this session.
Okay, so let me go to Lori on then. So where are we on the 5 that saved lives? So I put them up there, Lori, so you don't have to remember them, but they're on the slides. But where are we with those? I know we have some. We've done some stuff in almost all of those areas and laid the groundwork for hiring, purchase, or licensing. But where are we with those?
So, thanks, Josh. I'm glad to be here with all of you. Firearm safe storage policies, as the delegate has shared, we have a good, strong bill. We're going to work on it even more over the summer in anticipation of what we hope is going to be a trifecta and actually get it passed. And I think we're headed in the right direction with regard to firearm storage. We need to look at vehicles as well as homes. and what does that look like, and how much can we get done, and get the language carefully crafted, especially with vehicles, so that the storage compartment is attached to the vehicle. It's not just some lunchbox that can float around from the front seat to the back seat to the, So we've got some work to do, but we have a plan and we have a good path forward on safe storage. And we've seen the bills numerous times. Firearm removal, we know that you can have prohibitions for certain behaviors and certain risk factors and certain federal crimes, and even now for a subset, a narrowly focused set of domestic violence misdemeanors. These misdemeanors now come with the 3-year prohibition of firearm purchase or possession. However, unlike the risk order, the firearm substantial risk order that comes in the code with compliance language that forces the courts and the respondent to certify that he or she has in fact surrendered his firearm. We don't have that same compliance language in the domestic violence misdemeanor prohibition section of the code, and we've been trying to get that, i.e. we're not changing the law, we're just saying this person is prohibited, he or she must prove to the courts during the hearing, at the close of the hearing, this is where my firearm is and I have in fact surrendered it. And the person who is holding the firearm must meet certain criteria, be 21 or over, pass a background check, certain things. So removal is important. You can have these prohibitions and a judge can hit a gavel and say you're prohibited, but if the respondent walks out the doors and there's no mechanism for law enforcement or the courts or the public safety agencies to confirm that. We had a bill Senator Eben carried last year that would have prohibited the public carry of semi-automatic assault rifles. We know that those have no place in public. We also had a companion bill that would prohibit the sale of those, but we need to work on who can carry in public, what they can carry in public, what does their license look like. In Virginia, the license is a concealed handgun permit. They can only carry handguns concealed, but it's too easy. We don't have enough requirements. For one, we don't require live fire training. The training must be in person, but it's a 1-hour course, and no offense to Professor Horwitz, he could sit up here and talk for an hour and be, hand you a piece of paper that you could then take to your circuit court judge, and that would qualify you to get this license. So we think that concealed carry permitting licenses need to be elevated to come with standards that give some comfort to those of us walking around in public, that that person carrying that firearm has some training and some background. Community violence intervention funding, we have been successful in the Commonwealth of Virginia getting some funding put in the budget. There's currently, I think, don't quote me on the dollar amount, I think it's a $2.5 million grant that the Department of Criminal Justice Services just posted a request for proposals. It's specifically geared to nonprofits, and those are some of what we call community violence intervention. There's lots of after-school programs, there's lots of community programs, there's lots of faith-led programs in many of our urban centers that do very, very good work with youth and people who need help training for a new job or need help finding and securing better housing. We need to continue to fund those programs, and I think in Virginia we've done a decent job but not good enough. We also passed, and I noted it, Delegate Marcia Price had the bill, it got 54 votes in the House, a bill that would establish a Center for Firearm Violence Intervention and Prevention. We envision that center to be a hub for best practices, for data collection, for surveys, for information sharing, and when you have a jurisdiction, let's say Portsmouth says, you know what, we want to try this program. We read about it online. Does it work? Does it not work? What is the data? What is the survey? They can go to the center and say, help us implement this program. So, however, the governor vetoed it again. So We're just not getting very far. And lastly, but probably one of the bills that's going to take a lot of work, and we're in the middle of that process, is firearm purchaser licensing. Right now, no one knows who in this room who does or doesn't own a firearm. There's no record of that. There is no registration. There is no licensing in the Commonwealth. You do have to undergo a background check when you go to a federally licensed firearm dealer, but there's no above a background check, there is no information. As the data has shown, it is clearly an effort and a program that does a couple of things. It puts some time in between the person who's attempting the purchase and getting that firearm. And getting that license that may take up to 30 days, some states 15 days, some states, how broad, how length?
Well,
Up to-
in New York State, it can take more than that, but generally, I mean, in Maryland and other places, it's usually well under 30 days.
But the process of going to get the license, taking the time and getting vetted, an enhanced background check, persons have to undergo a background check, they have to undergo fingerprinting. That's not required with a background check right now in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They have to undergo live fire training, which includes certain criteria from a certified instructor. We know that some of these steps, again, vets the person who is intending to buy the firearm and puts some time and distance in between the purchase and access to that firearm. The data is very clear. It reduces firearm homicide, firearm suicide, and shootings by law enforcement officers. Law enforcement officers will say, "Hey, I know this person is licensed. They've got their gun. They're not potentially at a risk of harm to me." So that bill was offered in 2024 by Delegate Hope and was referred to the Crime Commission. The Crime Commission later in the year 2024 voted to study the firearm purchaser licensing process, and the study is to take place in the calendar year 2025. I believe it's ongoing as we sit here and speak. Josh and I have a meeting with the Virginia Crime Commission in a few weeks, so we feel strongly that that bill is going to, after much work and much study, will come to the legislature, we hope in January of 2026, and get a good reception at the legislature, and we can get that passed. So that's where we are on those
Great.
five.
Thank you.
Can I just real quick?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So just on some of the politics of some of this, just to understand where some of this is coming from. We did get, although we didn't get the Center for Firearms Violence Prevention, we did get some more money into the budget because the governor, we didn't expect him to veto the whole budget. He might, but he didn't. So there is a Firearms Violence Intervention Fund that we established. So there'll be some opportunities for grants and things like that. We won't have a center, which will be much better and have a more comprehensive way, but localities can apply for grants and there's some money that's available. But the politics is, so Republicans, we proposed this a few years ago, and they want something called Operation Ceasefire. And they wanted to sit in the Attorney General's office, which is Attorney General Miyares, and they wanted to have very much a law enforcement, at least this was they claimed, a law enforcement basis, and they wanted law enforcement intervention, as opposed to what Josh was describing earlier, places where it works, which social workers, peers, community, schools, all these other, to get the underlying issues that are behind the violence, as opposed to a stick approach, right? More of a, hey, what's really going on that's the source of this violence, and how can we interrupt it before it escalates. And so those are the models that we think work better. The Republicans insisted on the law enforcement. And even then, what they ended up spending most of their money on, frankly, were television commercials for Jason Miyares, where you'd see his face on billboards instead of saying, think about alternatives to firearm violence. Guns are not the answer, and is what it turned out to be used for. So we're trying to rein that in with our power over the purse strings with this Firearms Violence Intervention Fund. But I think that with a comprehensive center, I think, again, there is some bipartisan support for the idea of addressing firearms violence through early intervention. I think everybody conceptually is bought in on that concept. The specifics about who does it, how they do it, and where the emphasis is where the partisan difference I think comes in where we have an evidence-based approach.
Yeah. Well, there's actually some, talking about the difference between sort of behavioral approaches and crime approaches. There's a lot of research around cognitive behavioral therapy that's been very effective. But that's to be done by someone who's trained in psychology. And so it's not like we can just say, oh, law enforcement can do that. That's not something that they can do.
Yeah, and the threat of punishment doesn't work. It's not been studied well,
So let me bring Paul. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
One other thing. Ceasefire is a known firearm violence intervention program. But as the delegate shared in Virginia, they just kind of co-opted that name. They didn't implement it according to the terms and according to the program that is suggested. So I just didn't want to malign that program when there is some value to it. But the Attorney General spent $3 of the $5 million he got on media and commercials and billboards.
So let me bring Paul in, and then because Delegate Simon is short on time, I'm going to ask Paul a question, then I'm going to ask Delegate Simon a question, and then it would be your turn to ask Delegate Simon an issue or anybody else.
Oh, I thought I was going to get out of that.
Yeah, well, but you can't. This is a tough crowd. So I think it would be a great time to start handing some questions over to Edna. Is that who's collecting them? Okay, great. And so I'll just give you the timings because I want to make sure if you have a question for the delegate, you get that answered. So Paul, tell us about, are there other policies or strategies that you think are important, both either federally or in Virginia?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to be here with this extremely marvelous panel. I just want to start by saying, may the 4th be with you. And we must be better off turning to this plastic weapon rather than the kind of weapons that are being used out there to solve our problems. So let me just start with that.
I was wondering what you were going to do with that thing.
So I had to find a good reason to use this today. So, and also I want to say with my bio, I had a little snippet there. I wanted to just mention, when I was at Brandeis, I had an opportunity to take a criminal law class at Harvard. And these days, I'm prouder of that association than ever. I'll just leave that there. So I do want to mention that when I got involved in creating my own organization, Safer Country, in 2019, I looked at what a small nonprofit could do here, and one of the things that inspired me was Josh. Josh was on 60 Minutes talking about the red flag law and the potential for that law in our society as an intervention at the last moment. And while background checks are excellent at the front line, and we need to get rid of all the loopholes, there can often be a long lag time between the time someone gets a weapon and they may be entitled to that weapon, and the time that something happens to them in their lives that they then choose to use that weapon in the worst possible way. And so if we can, that's why it's so important what Josh is doing with his program. And what I chose to do early on was to look at how we could advance information and promote knowledge about our red flag law in Virginia. We passed it, as I mentioned, in 2020.
And that's the same as the substantial risk.
Yeah, the substantial risk order law in Virginia, and but it was it wasn't known, so they didn't. It was right in the middle of COVID, as you'll recall.
Yes.
And everyone was sort of obsessed, of course, with that. And there was no money put in the legislation, unfortunately, to promote it by the state. So I went to Fairfax County and asked if that county would be willing to create a model campaign so that we could start to begin to make people aware of, especially since Fairfax County is a place where the law has been used probably more frequently than any other place in the state. And they were willing to do that. So they passed the resolution unanimously, and they worked with me on Zoom for a few months to create a campaign. We called it Prevent a Gun Tragedy, Speak Up. And we put that message on signs in English and Spanish in buses throughout Fairfax County, and then I brought it to the city of Alexandria. We'd love to be able to do more of that. Obviously, the more people who know about the existence of this law, the more people can engage law enforcement and let them know they see a potential problem. And I know that your synagogue right here has produced a flyer, You Can Prevent a Gun Tragedy, right in line with our thinking. And this is marvelous. They're trying to promote knowledge. This is what we like to see. So I want to thank the synagogue and your group for working on this. So I know we've got to get to Delegate Simon, so I'll stop there for a moment, but I do have some other thoughts about what we've talked about.
We will absolutely get back to you. So if we're getting some questions in, that's great. So I'm going to ask this, though. So, Delegate, you talked about sort of where the politics are now. and how they're sort of a little bit, the legislature moves something, the governor vetoes it. What do you see what do you see the politics changing potentially in 2026, and what might that mean for gun violence prevention?
So I think, obviously it depends on the outcome of the election, right? Gun violence prevention, as you've noted, these policies on an individual basis are very popular. And I think you're going to see in the coming election, right? And so the primary early voting for the primaries have already started. We're already in election season here. And you'll really see it start to pick up come the end of summer here. But you'll see Democrats trying to hold on to the legislative seat. So just for those of you that don't know, I think these are a pretty well-educated crowd, but it's a 51-49 House majority. So we have the barest of majorities in the House of Delegates. We have a Senate majority of 21-19. Now the senators are not up, so there's no risk of losing the Senate right now, but we need to hold on to the House of Delegates, and then we need to look at the executive branch, so the governor and the attorney general in particular. The lieutenant governor as well, to break ties, is a helpful extra vote to have in the Senate. So all those elections, you'll see Democrats running on the issue of gun violence prevention and improving gun safety laws. You'll see us leveraging against some of these vetoes and some of these votes in some of the swing races as a way of contrasting what's there. And then the goal being, frankly, for some folks like me who chaired the public safety committees in 2026, we're hearing it, some of it nationally, but you'll hear us say, hey, we ran on these issues and we won. And this is, we have a mandate, right? This is our mandate, our legislative mandate to do this. So, I mean, it has the benefit of being, again, extremely popular. It's going to help us actually win the elections, but it's not anything that we want to hide from. It's not anything where we're trying to modulate, particularly, again, on the individual issues themselves. So I think that in 2026, you'll see us being fairly aggressive on things like some of the things we haven't talked about yet, but industry accountability. I think I know that we've had bills, Dan Helmer had bills in the last 2 years to create some civil liability for gun manufacturers. They're immune at the federal level, but states have taken some steps to try and hold gun manufacturers and dealers and marketers accountable for how their products are used. I think safe storage obviously is a very high priority, and that's one that Senator Boysko and I can't wait to actually get passed.
A lot of people are talking about assault weapons ban.
Assault weapons ban. Assault weapons ban is something that we, again, have not shied away from. In years past, you had, some of this is just an issue of the natural sorting that's happened, but you had some Democratic senators in particular that represented rural areas who were afraid to be out front on assault weapons ban and some of our issues, and open carry and so forth. And so I think those folks are a dying breed. I mean, they're gone. And it's interesting, actually. The Senate has become they were always the more conservative roadblock to some of what the progressive House wanted to do. In some ways, because of the way the redistricting worked out, they're more progressive now than the House. But 68, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, or not Kamala and Harris Walz, and Tim Kaine together, they won like 60-some House seats, right? So we have a 51-seat majority, but in 60 plus, like 62 of those seats were won by the Harris Walz ticket. So we have 62 targets to try and flip. So I think although right now, currently, the House is a little more conservative as far as what it's been willing to do on some of these issues. If we get to 55 or 57 or 60 votes, you'll have a lot more votes to spare. Again, I think you'll see us running on and then winning on and then governing with a strong foot forward on gun violence prevention stuff.
All right. Do we have some audience questions?
So we can pass it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I know, yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think I can.
While you're pondering, can I tell a quick story?
Please.
Great.
I need a
All
plan
right,
to
so
get me through this.
I went to a firearms store recently here in Fairfax County, just in the last few days. And while I was there, I asked very innocently about the AR-15 in their store. They had a whole wall of these weapons. They handed me a few, and one of them they gave me had a scope on it. And I looked through that scope. You could see something 500 to 600 yards away right in front of you. And they were very happy to sell it to me cash. They'd absorb the cost of the taxes. They, half off, they wanted to move this item, and they move about 100 of these items a year. 10 or so a month. And this is just one store. And they didn't ask me any questions about what I wanted to do with it, who I was. Could I pass a background check before they put this in my hand and said, well, what do you think? Does it feel good? Now, the reason I was actually there was because a few weeks earlier, they were in the news for having had guns stolen from their shop. A car had driven through, you may have seen this in the news, car driven through the front doors, grabbed a bunch of weapons, which apparently were not secure enough to stay in the store, and threw them in the car and headed out. Now, they were caught in Maryland. We don't know exactly how many guns they recovered or how many they stole. That was sort of out of the news. But, you know, when that happened, I wrote to the owner and I said, you know, I looked at their store online and I saw no protection for the front of their store, open parking lot. I said, had you ever thought of putting bollards in front of your door just to keep the cars from driving in? Well, I have to say, I was very pleased when I went there just recently. They have put those in, and they put a few more security things in. So, but every one of these stores should be doing that. And as well, when I asked them about safes, gun safes and locks, I said, do you make any recommendation to anyone who buys something here to buy any of that? And they said, no, that's not our concern. I said, would you ever sell anything like that? No, we can't really afford to do that. It's up to them to find a place. If they ask, we might guide them. So we have a free-for-all going on and weapons going out into our state. And, you know, and once they're in the state, they're anywhere, right? I want to just add the geography. She mentioned this earlier. You know, I grew up in Connecticut. They are seeing a lowering in homicide, but an increase in suicide. But the reality is that they live in a more contained area. Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, they're all sort of on the same page. You can't get that in other parts of the country. That's why Hawaii is on that area. You know, they're isolated. But in other parts of the country where you can go from Indiana to Chicago, it's not quite the same thing. All right, are you ready?
All right, great. Thanks. So I'm going to ask you two questions, and I think we'll let you go. So number one, I mean, you can stay, please, if you're enjoying it so much. But so what are when you're the sponsor on the safe storage bill, right? I think I got that right.
Yeah.
What's the argument against that?
Okay, actually, that's a great question. So, and this is one where I think, you know, we can improve, and I start with myself, right, is the storytelling. The research is great, the statistics are great, the information is great, but the narrative storytelling sometimes is where the Republicans seem to do a better job. So the conversation about the safe storage bill, Nick Freitas gets up, and he's a legislator, he's retiring, fortunately, from Culpeper, but he's got about 1 million followers on Instagram. He's a social media influencer, is his day job. And he gets up and he weaves this tale about his 16-year-old daughter on their farm in rural Culpeper and an intruder banging at the door, you know, ready to come in and do her harm. And, you know, if I give her the combination to the safe so that she can get the gun out of storage so that she can defend herself against this intruder, she's a criminal and I'm a criminal. Isn't that true, Delegate Simon, right? And then that video clip goes viral on his Instagram page, right? And that's sort of the emotional argument against it. And I'm like, look, you weave an interesting tale. The facts are that the much more likely scenario, and the one we've actually seen happen, is that teenager is feeling suicidal and accesses the gun and does harm to themselves. Or that teenager accesses the gun and takes it to a school and does harm to others before doing harm to themselves. Like, I can tell you the real stories and the actual things and the statistically more likely things, but for the folks that Nick's speaking to, that story about the daughter, they can sort of put themselves in her shoes or themselves as the dad feeling helpless to do anything about this intruder, and that's the argument against safe storage. So yeah, it seems like, well, this seems so easy. That's the argument that comes up against it, and that's the one that's what we bump into.
Okay, great. And then I'm going to ask everybody this, but what can individuals here do to make a difference?
Well, I mean, participate in the process, educate your neighbors and your friends. I mean, help us with stories, right? Help us with your own stories if you can tell them. It's interesting that make this a higher priority, you know, for folks. So, right, these issues are very popular. You talk about the 80 and the 70, even among gun owners and so forth. The folks, though, for whom gun violence is the #1 issue, the folks that are against it, right? The anti-folks, right? The ones that don't want us to do anything and want us to look to let anybody carry anywhere. That's when they go to vote. That's the only issue they care about. They're really, really highly motivated about it. Folks that are like, yeah, that's a good idea. I think probably red flag laws are good, but that isn't necessarily their highest priority when they're choosing a candidate to elect to office. And they've got some other things that they want to get to. So yeah, I'd support that, but on balance, and they're also they're the media world that they live in and the feedback that they're getting. So again, they might like us on 3 out of these 4 or 5 out of these 6 issues, but the one where they maybe don't agree with us is very emotional, or they've been convinced that the most important thing is something else, and that they really need to cast their vote based on some other issue, whether it's the economy, whether it's the auto pen that's secretly signing executive orders, or whatever it is. I only know a few of these things that break through my bubble, but they're living in a different bubble. So to the extent that they sort of raise the profile of the issue by talking about it, sharing the information, help us come up with stories that break through the narrative. Because again, the charts and the statistics are great, but it's people vote based on how they feel a lot and not on what they think. We're always trying to make them think. Republicans, as you can see, often want to make them feel things. And so I think you guys can help us more than I can help making people feel the urgency behind this issue.
Yeah, and a lot, sort of modern communication theories talks a lot about speaking in values. So the more we can talk about things, and obviously there's the safety issue that Delegate Freitas brought up is one thing, but I like to talk about we should all have the freedom to sit on our front porch and not worried about being shot, right? Or worry that our kid's going to die at a play date, at somebody's house. So talk in stories, and I think that's something that will help. If you wanted to learn about, we're not going to endorse candidates today. We're not going to talk about candidates, but if you wanted to learn about where candidates' positions on this issue are, how would we do that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a singular website for you to go to do that. If there's one website, I guess I would recommend to anybody if you want to do some research on where people stand, it's the Virginia Public Access Project. It's vpap.org. vpap.org is a great place to do research to find out how folks vote. They have a lot of infographics and things like that. I say go to virginiahousedems.org, but I don't know what's up there, so I'm not going to give out our website.
We'll get them to put
They
something.
can contact you, right?
You can always contact me.
There you go.
And I'll let you know who to vote for and how to vote.
So would you like to be excused? It's a good time.
It is exactly 4 o'clock, so thank you guys again, really, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I wish I didn't have to leave early, this has been more fun than where I'm gonna go, but I was just sitting on 95 in traffic on my way to Richmond. But thank you guys very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks
Really
for
good
covering
time.
my schedule.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So now we've got some, I have other questions to ask, but I got some great questions from the communities, which I would like to get to our remaining panelists, and I may throw an answer or two in. But let's go by what the individuals can do.
Yeah.
Let's go Paul and then Lori on that.
Sure. So I think one of the things that we're confronted with often is, can you tell a story to somebody when you're talking to them and they're not entirely on your side, but they're willing to listen to you and they're willing to discuss. So I can offer you 3 things. One is I know that in public housing in parts of our state, there are potentially crises outside where there's a fight, a gun is fired, and I know a story of a small child who was killed because they were in the parents' bedroom and the bullet flew through the room, a wild shot, and killed a child in the room. We cannot defend against that. No one can expect you to be armed to defend against bullets flying into your home. So when people say, well, we just need more guns and arm more people because they will protect you, tell them that story. Then we have 250,000 guns approximately stolen out of cars in America every year. Many of them are being stolen in Richmond. We have a lot of guns being stolen in Richmond. We have legislators who have worked on that problem. We need to have a requirement, and I know that this is one of the things they're thinking about, which is to require these guns to be locked in the trunk or someplace out of the reach of a driver. Not only would it, locking it up in that compartment, prevent theft when they're out of the car, but it also prevents road rage. Because if you can't reach for that gun in the glove box, you can't just grab it and shoot someone when you get upset. You have to force you to stop your car, get out, figure out how to get into that lock, even if it's with a handprint. The bottom line is it's going to delay you and give that time for that road rage to settle. So we need to have a different approach. This is about preventing the loss of lives. And let me just add one more really critical story to tell you. We spent in 2022, the president and Congress passed on a bipartisan basis what is now known as the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That bill had 10 Republicans vote in the Senate to break the filibuster. I was in the Senate up in the rafters watching that at the time. I was very moved. It was exciting to be there with the community that cared about safety. a couple of $billion put towards this effort, and half that money, $1 billion, was put towards mental health. Republicans, that was their requirement, even though we were thrilled to have more money for mental health in communities and schools. But in the last couple of days, the current administration has decided to say, we're stopping the grants, $1 billion in grants for mental health. The communities in these schools that require to pay their counselors and to pay the people who will help these kids so they won't end up shooting up their school or someone's home or someone's life. That's not going to be available. And they're going to have to find that money, and that's not easy. That's why we had to go to the federal government to get that money.
Yeah, I'll just add that, we've made some progress there, but with from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, but with that money now gone, or seemingly gone, I think I think some of that progress could certainly be reversed, and that's going to be very unfortunate.
So when you're telling stories, tell the story. It's the Republicans who wanted that money. They believe, it's clearly, mental health is just a component. It's often a small component. Most of the people struggling with mental health are the victims of violence and guns. But even so, even when they want to just help people, we're not able to do that.
Yeah. So, Lori, what would you do? And maybe this is a good chance to talk about our Advocacy Day, maybe maybe potentially.
What would I finish the question?
So what can people do to get involved?
Well, number one, thank you for being here. That shows you're willing and ready and committed to think about the issue and to learn more about it and to perhaps go home and share it with your neighbors, your friends, your book club, the taxi driver, your other social work, your volunteer groups. Really, truly, as everybody at the table has said and Josh has said, we need to continue to talk about it, tell your stories, say, hey, did you know I went to this forum the other day and we need to pass a safe storage bill? Well, what, you mean you don't have to lock up your guns when children are in the home? So you need to communicate as often and in as many places as you can about this. Number two, we need to show up in Richmond to the extent that we can. It makes a difference to our legislators and our lawmakers to feel a pressure and an interest from as many people as possible on any given issue. And for that reason, a host of groups, a large number of groups cooperate and together plan a MLK Day rally annually in Richmond, Virginia. It's at the Virginia General Assembly, on the Capitol grounds, just down the hill from the Virginia General Assembly. We invite you to come. We've had a bus from Northern Virginia, and I think some of you have cooperated and helped spread that word. But it's important for legislators to see your face, to understand that you're interested, and that this is an important, if not number one issue for you, a very important issue for you, because that makes them feel comfortable in saying, you know what, my constituents care about this. Look at all these people who care. It's MLK Day annually in Richmond, Virginia, that same Monday every year. So more information will be coming out.
What's the date? It fluctuates.
It's the Monday, third Monday, the Monday that we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday.
Yes.
So it's, thank you. If somebody has a 2026 calendar, I'd love to know it because I'd.
It is the third Monday in January.
Thank you.
We've gone down almost every year. Last year we brought several people with us.
Yes.
It's a really good thing to do.
It is a really good thing. And what we do is we gather on the grounds near the bell tower at 2 p.m. We have a vigil and we have some speakers and we have some interfaith prayers. And then guess what? We go up the hill into the building at the Virginia General Assembly and we invite you to stop in and visit not only your legislator, but as many legislators as you can, in particular those on the House Public Safety Committee and on the Senate Courts of Justice Committee. That way they know who you are, they know you care. We provide you with postcards and information. So that is it's an important piece. And I'll, go ahead.
Actually advertise that throughout our temple literature. So
Yeah.
look.
All right, so for those who are online and watching, there will be information about Advocacy Day in Temple material come the fall, I believe. Okay, great. All
And
right.
then one last thing, when you're if you choose to participate, and I suspect most of you do, in political processes, and you're in an audience, ask the question, Mr. Candidate, Miss Candidate, how do you feel about safe storage? How do you feel about gun violence prevention efforts? How do you feel about firearm removal? How do you feel about firearm purchase or licensing or funding for programs? Ask the question. That way, again, they know you're watching, you're paying attention, you're listening, and it puts them on record that that is an issue that matters to you at the polls.
All right, so we're going to get to a couple more questions from everybody, and then we got a few more minutes. So what is the law enforcement's position on the 5 points, or, up here, but I think more in general, what's law enforcement's position on some of the policies that we're trying to advocate for?
You want to take that?
Sure. So law enforcement's job is to enforce the law and then keep us safe, keep their communities safe. And generally speaking, most, if not all of them, have a commitment and have signed, have taken an oath of office and are committed to working in this regard. Large jurisdictions have police departments. Smaller jurisdictions, less populated, have sheriffs. And those sheriffs are elected. They have to run for office. They may have a conservative background. They may have a progressive background. So it depends upon your jurisdiction and your perspective, often in certain areas of the Commonwealth. That being said, I run across law enforcement officers across the entire Commonwealth who shake my hand, thank me, are happy with the laws we're passing, are supportive of other laws that we're passing, and generally speaking are proactive. One of the things that we've experienced in the post-George Floyd era is just a shrinking of many of the police agencies and the sheriff's offices and their personnel and their number of staff. I know that the Virginia State Police advertise, I don't know, over 100 open positions right now. So it's very, very difficult for law enforcement officers and agencies to address everything they want to address. Do they want to get training on risk orders? Yes, but they don't have the time. Do they want to understand compliance with domestic violence protective orders and possession and purchase prohibitions? Yes. Do they have the capacity? They'll argue maybe they don't. So I'm sympathetic to that difficulty that they have, but I'm also compelled to ask them, if you can undergo 1 hour training and it will save a life, is that worth it to you? So it just depends upon where they're from, who they are, what role they play, But we do know, sadly, when they don't have the training, when they don't have the information, when they don't understand the breadth of laws in the Commonwealth, and in particular, the risk order red flag, that people die.
Look, that's a good segue. So
let me just add a real quick note to
Yeah.
that. And when this law was first implemented in Virginia, many of the sheriffs in the further reaches of the state were not happy about it. They didn't think that their constituents wanted it. They saw it as against the Second Amendment in their view, and many of their constituents did. And yet, when push came to shove, and they saw opportunities to use it, they softened. They saw the reality. They started to use it in spots all over the state. And it is remarkable that sometimes when people actually see the value of something, they can overcome their preconditioned viewpoint. So that was good to say.
It's fascinating to see which jurisdictions.
So let me
Yeah.
ask this question by way of a story. We saw recently a terrible shooting in Crozet, Virginia. Someone was killed in a Harris Teeter. The shooter in that situation, the family had warned law enforcement that the shooter was going to be in danger, needed some help. Law enforcement didn't respond with an extreme risk protection order. They said nothing that we can do, probably didn't know about the extreme risk protection order. So if that law was in place, if they had been in Fairfax County, a family member comes to law enforcement and says, a loved one's in crisis, they're going to get a red flag. Then you get an extreme risk order or what we call a red flag order, no doubt about that. But in other parts of the state, this law is not as well implemented. And in this chance in Crozet, that's where a red flag law would have saved someone's life here. And it's a shame that that didn't happen, but that's why law matters. So starting with that, what are the statewide efforts to implement what we call, risk orders or substantial risk orders, same thing as red flag laws?
Let me just jump in here. The federal government provided in that Safer Communities Act money for every state to use. It wasn't until really just a month or so ago that our state decided to actually provide an opportunity for local jurisdictions to apply for grants to get access to some of that money. They're not, and even then, they only gave you a month window, and it was extremely complicated. I read through the process, and they're going to give another window in July, I believe. But the bottom line is that we got over $4 million in the state to work with, and I don't expect a lot of it to be used, at least initially. And who knows how long it'll still be there before some of the money there might be grabbed back the way the mental health money is. So what we really do need, if the state does elect people who have support for our views on this issue, then we can, even if we can't get access to that federal funding or it's difficult, we can do our own thing in the state to expand on promoting our model campaign in Fairfax County, for instance, and get the word out to everybody, and also try in that information we provide to respond to the questions that people who are knee-jerk negative towards this will understand it and will address their concerns. So I should add, this comes from a court order. So in other words, you have to go in Virginia, if you have a problem, you have to reach out to law enforcement, but law enforcement has to get a court order. They have to make a case. They have to show probable cause before that order can be issued. And then even if it is issued, you have less than 2 weeks, if the person wants their gun rights back and their guns back, you have less than 2 weeks to go back to court and show by a preponderance of the evidence, not a probable cause, that there's a reason to continue this order to keep them out of reach of their guns and unable to buy new ones. So it is not an easy thing to do. It puts a lot of pressure on the prosecutor, the county commonwealth's attorneys in these jurisdictions, to get the evidence and to put it before a judge and make the case. So you really have to have proof. It's not something that's done in a light way or because someone wants revenge against their neighbor or whatever their excuse is. So it's a really difficult thing to do. But if it needs to get done, and we have the evidence, we've seen that it can be very effective.
Okay, Laura, did you want to add anything to that?
We've seen some efforts across the Commonwealth to educate law enforcement officers and police agencies. Our team, as an example, we facilitated a training with the University of Virginia's Police Department and their threat assessment team back in October. It was well attended. We had law enforcement from VCU and other colleges and universities. There is other opportunities for training. The Virginia Association of Commonwealth's Attorney does something annually. They have I don't know what it's called, but the judges have an annual meeting, and they've done it there. There's a law enforcement officer who is on staff at the Department of Criminal Justice Services. He has a training module available. Unfortunately, he's not allowed to proactively go out and put that training module out, but he can give it if requested. We've done an event with the Victim Services Network. There's, some education and training happening. Clearly, it's not enough. It's not robust enough, and we need to do a better job so that more of these law enforcement agents and officers and departments understand how to assess and what does risk look like, and that it's only probable cause, and that the person does not have to have a mental illness diagnosis, that there are a host of reasons why a person might be in crisis. If you think about it, alcoholism is not a diagnosed mental illness. Hate, racism, anger, grief, retaliation. Those are emotions. They put you at risk of perhaps harm to self or others, but they're not a diagnosable mental
So I mean,
illness.
same thing with concussions or head injuries.
You know, there's all sorts of, you know, after a mass shooting, everybody says, what were the warning signs? What were the warning signs? Why didn't this person, you know, why didn't law enforcement catch them? Because they, at the time, often didn't have the tools. This person might have been at risk, might have been exhibiting behaviors. Loved ones often know. The shooter in Creuset, his mother and sister had called law enforcement multiple times and said, help us. Come take his guns.
Yeah.
Help us.
Behavior is the critical thing here, not your mental state. But it's really critical to know that so many people are sending messages in advance of what they're doing to their relatives, to people they know. In so many ways, they're crying out for help before they take action. They could be texting people messages about suicide. They could be texting people messages about wanting to shoot up their former workplace or whatever they may be. But very often, you look at the stories, there is they are telegraphing, they are sending out messages, but we have to be there to receive them, and we have to act on them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know the committee here has been talking about that, and this has given me some ideas for the committee. So, so we're going to be done at 4:30 because we said we would. So I got a bunch of questions I think I can answer pretty quickly. So I'm going to do that, but I'm going to have you two contemplate your final question.
Okay.
And that final question is, if you were the governor for a day, what would you do first on gun violence prevention? Okay, so that's where we're going to end this, and we'll go. But I'm going to answer some of the great questions that came up here. So, number one, someone asked, open carry versus concealed carry, any statistics by violence by states with each type? So I mentioned about 25 states, you don't even need a concealed carry permit. So we've been studying this for a number of years, and what we can see is that the states that have what's called more permissive concealed carry laws. So there's a continuum of what states have. Some have very strict requirements, some have some requirements and a permit, some have no permit. What we can tell is the states that have the more requirements, you're safe, that they're safer. So states that have what was called may issue, where you have actually some discretion before issuing a permit, which is harder and harder to do with our Supreme Court. But those states with a permit, you see, we're seeing about 13 to 15% less violent crime, fewer assaults. So states with strict, carry permitting, those states have better results, less crime, less violent assaults. Okay, so that's one of those things. Okay, I have a question. What role does the Brady, this says anti-gun organization, play with Johns Hopkins? We partner with them frequently. They use our research all the time. They're more on the advocacy side. We do both. Advocacy and research, but we're very close with them, and their director of programs and policy was someone who worked with Lori and I for over a decade. So we're really close with them and the other organizations. We like to think we play well in the sandbox with all the other organizations, and they rely on us, and we are especially close with the state gun violence prevention organizations. We provide a lot of research and a lot of advocacy tools for those state organizations. Next question, in Virginia, could someone openly carry a firearm without a special license? You do not you do not need a license at all to open carry in Virginia. Okay, that's that. Okay, are there any organizations or efforts that are making progress on bringing gun violence prevention advocates and gun owners and advocates together in a collaborative action? Well, I'd like to say that our center, we do a lot of that. Our co-director is a gun owner and works and involved in sporting competitions. Her name is Professor Cassandra Crafasi. We work closely together. We have a clinical program team, and the lead doctor there, Catherine Hoops, is a gun owner, does a lot of gun training, I think has a lot of credibility there. And I think that being a gun owner and being a gun violence prevention advocate can actually go hand in hand. And there's a lot more people who do that now than you would think. And there's some pretty big examples of that. And there's some really amazing materials on safe storage and other things coming not just out of our center, but out of this sort of group of people who are involved in this. So you can come to our website and learn more about the safe storage and what we're doing there. But I think, in our organization, we are combining gun owners and non-gun owners for good solutions, I believe. Okay. I'm very interested in community violence intervention. Yes, the one that says the fifth Hopkins solution. Do you have any suggestions or interventions that have been implemented in other cities, countries, are shown to be successful? So what is gun violence, community violence intervention? Where does it work? There's some really good examples of where it's worked before. New York City is probably the best, comes to my mind. New Haven, Connecticut, Bridgeport, and other states. So there's a mixed record. There's some that have been quite successful, and others that have not. We're still learning about it, and there's a whole bunch of different things. There's one where you're really trying to intervene between a shooter, someone who's in a bad situation, a shooter, and someone who they might want to injure, like the sort of credible messenger, someone who's out there trying to negotiate something better than a violent outcome. There's hospital violence intervention programs. Someone comes into a hospital, there's a unique opportunity to talk to them about the services they may need. People who are injured by gun violence are at a much higher risk for being re-injured by gun violence. So we've seen some good results from hospital intervention programs. I've mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy. There's some really nice programs that work on that. There's some programs in Chicago called Ready Chicago and Chicago Cred, which really work on job-based skills, have been successful. And then in Baltimore, we have we've got a program called ROCA, and a program called Safe Streets. You may have seen that Baltimore had its lowest homicide numbers, basically forever, last month in April. So we're seeing some good results. What I've learned over the years, there's no one solution. You need to match community violence intervention with good policy, with resources. All these things come together. So you can go and look at some of the work that we've done evaluating Baltimore's Safe Streets program. My colleague and amazing Professor Daniel Webster has been working on this for years. You can see his reports on our website and see for yourself how these programs work. The most important thing, not one size fits all. What you have to do is gather community. We have a vehicle for that called Crime Reduction Councils. We have a whole toolkit on how to create one of these. And then from there, you can really understand what pieces you need to pull in. But no surprise coming from somebody who works at Johns Hopkins, you've got to do sort of an analysis, look at the data in your own city or county before you just jump into a program. It may be that something that works in Baltimore is not going to work in Fairfax, right? Or even DC. There could be different types of problems. So it's really about data collection and then developing your program. Okay, so those are the questions we had. And now for our finale with 4 minutes left, that's 2 minutes apiece. We'll start with Lori. You're the governor. What do you want to accomplish in your first day in office?
Safe storage. I really find it unacceptable and just morally repugnant that firearms are the #1 killer of children, not only in the Commonwealth and across this country. They're our most vulnerable, they're most at risk. I just find it astounding and just disgusting that we can't do this for our children. I remember a time when car seats came on the market and they were wonderful, but not everybody was using them, and car accidents were, way up there with causing death among children. Guess what? We passed a law, we mandated the use of car seats up to a certain age or a certain weight, and now deaths from vehicular accidents among children are way down. When you see a problem and you understand the problem, you assess it, you look at the numbers, and you look at the solution, and you don't follow the solution, again, it's inexplicable to me. The governor vetoed the safe storage bill, and last week we had a 3-year-old, found his parents' firearm and is dead right now. I can tell that story so many times. If you own a gun, lock it up.
And that's a powerful story. And those lines have crossed. So more people die in gun violence than they do in car accidents now.
Yes.
And that's because we put cars as a public health issue, and we need to do the same thing with firearms. Thank you,
Well,
Lori, for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. That was powerful, and of course, I concur entirely. But since you've covered that, and of course, you can't solve all the legislative problems in one day as governor. But here's what I want to share. Right now, I'm working on a project in D.C. We have the National Black Movie Association work with a group of students in one school in D.C., asking them if they wanted to learn film skills so that they could have a direction and not lack a direction to give their lives some more meaning. She asked them if they wanted to make a 10-minute film, and she said if they did, what would the film be about? And they said they want to talk about the gun violence problem in their community, in their school, in their lives. And so they did do that. They created a 10-minute film. It's a really powerful story, and they performed in that movie. And what we really need to do is listen to these young people and hear them. And we're going to work to project that film and get it out and make sure people see what these young people are saying about their own lives. But we could be doing that in every school, every critical school where there are problems in this state. And if I were the governor for a day, I would allocate the funds to do that, and I would travel to those schools on a given day, and I would bring some acting, directing, and celebrities with me so that we could excite those young people and tell them we want to hear their stories, we want to engage them, we want to involve them in their future and make them sure that they realize they can have a future. They don't have to live in the world in which we have relegated them to, sadly, in this society. So we need to do more along those lines to engage young people, to hear their voices, listen to them, and act on it.
Great. Thank you both so very much for that. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate this great audience. Yes.
Before you return it back to Edna and close, I just wanted to, I'm Hillary Horn, Social Justice Chair, thank our team who put this event together. Can you please stand up, Irv? Edna's our
I just wanted to add my thanks to the panel and our moderator.
Anytime.
Thank you so much, and it's really a blessing to have you to be our mentor. We really appreciate that. And we have some cookies and coffee, tea, and a chance to chat. So
Okay.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.